The rain battered the roof of the old cabin, a relentless drumbeat that drowned out the world beyond. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding louder than the storm. Beside me, Ethan's steady breathing was the only anchor in the chaos of my thoughts. We weren't supposed to be here, not like this. Not in a shared bed, in a remote cabin in the Oregon woods, with the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on us. But life has a way of unraveling plans, and ours had unraveled spectacularly. My name is Caleb, 25, a graphic designer from Portland with a knack for overthinking and a family that expects me to follow their rules. Ethan, my best friend since high school, is 26, a carpenter with calloused hands and a smile that could stop time. We'd always been too close, some might say, but in a small town like ours, where tradition runs deeper than the roots of the ancient pines, we'd learned to keep certain feelings buried. It started innocently enough. A weekend getaway, just the two of us, to escape the suffocating expectations of our families. Ethan's dad had been pushing him toward marriage with a girl from church, while my parents kept dropping hints about settling down. We needed air, space, a chance to breathe. So we borrowed my uncle's cabin, packed a cooler with beer, and promised ourselves 2 days of freedom. The first day was perfect. We hiked through the forest, laughed over old memories, and grilled steaks under a sky bursting with stars. But that night, as the storm rolled in and the power flickered out, we found ourselves sharing the only bed in the cabin. It was practical, we told ourselves. The couch was too small, and the floor was freezing. Just two friends making do. But then his hand slid lower. It was a slow, tentative movement, his fingers brushing against my hip under the blanket. My breath caught, and I froze, every nerve in my body screaming. Was it an accident? A dream? Or was this the moment we'd both been avoiding for years? Caleb, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. You awake? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was a wildfire, burning through every defense I'd built. I turned my head, and in the faint moonlight, I saw his eyes wide, searching, terrified. And yet, there was something else there. Something I'd seen 1,000 times but never dared name. Longing. I'm sorry, he said quickly, pulling his hand back. I didn't mean. Don't. I cut him off, my voice shaking. Don't apologize. He stared at me, and the air between us felt like it could shatter. We'd danced around this for years, stolen glances, lingering touches, moments we'd brushed off as nothing. But here, in this storm-soaked cabin, there was no more room for pretense. I reached for his hand, my fingers trembling as they closed around his. His skin was warm, rough from years of working with wood, and it grounded me even as my world tilted. Ethan, I said, my voice barely a whisper. What are we doing? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned closer, his forehead resting against mine. I don't know, he admitted. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. The words hit me like a punch. All the years of hiding, of swallowing my feelings to fit into the mold of who I was supposed to be, unraveled in that moment. I wanted to kiss him, to pull him closer and let the world fall away. But fear clawed at my fear of what this meant, of what we'd lose if we crossed this line. We can't, I said, even as my heart screamed otherwise. Our families, our lives. I know, he said, his voice breaking. But Caleb, I'm tired. Tired of lying. Tired of pretending I don't love you. Love. The word hung between us, heavy and undeniable. I'd known it for years, buried it under layers of denial. But hearing it from him made it real. Too real. The storm raged on outside. But inside, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would either destroy us or set us free. We didn't sleep that night. We lay there, hands entwined, talking in whispers about everything and nothing. He told me about the first time he realized he felt something for mid-junior year, when I'd helped him study for a math test, and he'd spent more time watching me than the textbook. I confessed how I'd memorized the way his laugh sounded, how I'd replayed it in my head on the worst days. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the weight of our confession lingered. We didn't kiss, didn't cross that final line, but something had shifted. We couldn't go back to being just friends, not after this. As we packed up to leave, Ethan paused, his hand on the doorframe. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice raw. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we'll figure it out. Together." He nodded, a small smile breaking through the fear in his eyes. And as we drove back to Portland, the silence between us wasn't empty, it was filled with possibility, with the promise of something new and terrifying and beautiful. But the real world was waiting, and it wasn't kind to promises like ours. Back in Portland, the weight of reality settled like damp fog. Ethan dropped me off at my apartment, a cramped studio overlooking a noisy street. We lingered in his truck, neither of us ready to say goodbye, but the words from the cabin felt too fragile to survive the city's hum. "I'll call you," he said, his hand gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him steady. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Don't be a stranger." But as I climbed the stairs to my place, doubt crept in. What were we doing? We'd cracked open a door that couldn't be closed, but stepping through it meant facing a world that wouldn't understand. My parents, devout and traditional, would never accept this. Ethan's dad, a pastor, would probably disown him. And our friends, would they see us differently? Would they turn away? I spent the next few days drowning in work, sketching logos for a client who kept changing their mind. But every quiet moment brought Ethan back, his voice, his touch, the way his eyes softened when he said he loved me. I wanted to call him, but fear held me back. What if he'd changed his mind? What if the cabin was just a moment of weakness? On Wednesday, my phone buzzed with a text, "Meet me at the pier tonight. 8 p.m. No explanation, just Ethan's name glowing on the screen. My heart leapt, but my stomach twisted. This was the moment we'd either move forward or fall apart. The pier was alive with tourists and street performers, the air thick with the smell of fried food and salt water. Ethan was already there, leaning against the railing, his flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows. He looked like he belonged here, solid and unyielding, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside. "Hey," I said, shoving my hands in my pockets to keep from reaching for him. "Hey." He turned, and for a moment, we just stood there, the crowd fading into a blur. "I couldn't stop thinking about you." "Same," I admitted, my voice barely audible over the waves. "But Ethan, it's not simple." "I know." He stepped closer, his voice low. "But I meant what I said. I love you, Caleb. I've loved you for years." The words hit harder in the open air, where anyone could hear. I glanced around, half expecting judgment in every passing face. But no one cared. They were too busy with their own lives. Maybe that was the first lesson. The world wasn't always watching. We walked along the pier, talking about everything except the thing that mattered most. He told me about a new carpentry project, a custom bookshelf for a local library. I rambled about a design deadline I was barely meeting. But the unspoken question hung between us: what now? As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan stopped. "I want to try," he said, his voice steady despite the tremble in his hands. Us. Together. But I need to know you're in. I wanted to say yes, to throw caution to the wind and kiss him right there. But the weight of my family, my faith, my entire life pressed down on me. I'm scared. I confessed. What if we lose everything? He reached for my hand, his touch warm and sure. We might, he said. But what if we gain everything instead? That night, we didn't make any grand promises. We didn't need to. We sat on a bench, sharing a bag of kettle corn, and for the first time, I let myself imagine a future where we didn't have to hide. It was fragile, but it was ours. The next week was a blur of stolen moments. A coffee shop date where our knees brushed under the table. A late-night drive where we blasted music and sang off-key. Each moment felt like a rebellion, a defiance of the rules we'd grown up with. But the real test came sooner than I expected. My mom called on Friday, her voice bright with news. Caleb, we're having a family dinner tomorrow. Bring Ethan. It's been too long. My stomach dropped. Ethan at my parents' house, where every wall was adorned with crosses and every conversation circled back to faith. It was a minefield, but I couldn't say non-it without raising suspicion. Okay, I said, my throat tight. We'll be there. When I told Ethan, his face paled, but he nodded. We'll get through it, he said. Together. I wanted to believe him. But as we drove to my parents' house the next evening, the weight of their expectations felt like a noose tightening around us. We were walking into a storm, and I wasn't sure we'd come out unscathed. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and my mom's lavender candles. A combination that usually felt like home, but tonight felt like a trap. Ethan sat across from me, his smile polite but strained, as my parents peppered us with questions about work and life. My dad, a retired mechanic with a voice like gravel, kept glancing at Ethan, like he could sense something was off. So, Ethan, my mom said, passing the mashed potatoes, your dad says you're seeing that nice girl from church. Sarah, was it? Ethan's fork froze midway to his mouth. I shot him a look, my heart pounding. We hadn't prepared for this. No, he said, clearing his throat. We're just friends. Oh, that's a shame, my mom said, oblivious to the tension. You two would make such a cute couple. I nearly choked on my water. Ethan's eyes met mine, a silent plea for help, but I didn't know how to navigate this either. The conversation shifted to my job, then to church, but the air felt heavier with every word. My parents didn't know about a skull no, but their questions were like probes, searching for cracks in our armor. After dinner, we escaped to the backyard, claiming we needed air. The night was cool, the stars sharp against the black sky. Ethan leaned against the oak tree, his hands stuffed in his pockets. That was brutal, he muttered. Yeah, I said, kicking at the grass. I'm sorry. I didn't think they'd bring up Sarah. He shook his head. It's not your fault. It's just, this is what it's going to be like, isn't it? Hiding. Pretending. The truth of his words stung. I wanted to tell him it would get easier, that we could find a way to be ourselves without losing everything. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stepped closer, my hand brushing his. We'll figure it out, I said, echoing the promise from the cabin. He looked at me, his eyes searching. Will we? Before I could answer, my dad called us back inside for dessert. The rest of the night passed in a blur of small talk and forced smiles. But the question lingered. Could we keep this up? Could we build a life in the shadows? The next day, Ethan showed up at my apartment unannounced. a six-pack of beer in hand. "We need to talk," he said, his voice urgent. We sat on my couch, the TV humming in the background, and he laid it all bare. "I can't keep lying to my dad," he said. "He's planning this big family meeting to talk about my future. He thinks I'm proposing to Sarah soon." My stomach twisted. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing yet," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But I'm running out of excuses. Caleb, I want to be with you. But I don't know how to do this without blowing up my life." I reached for his hand, my heart aching. "I know. My parents, they'd lose it if they knew. But I don't want to lose you." He squeezed my hand, his eyes fierce. "Then we fight for this. We find a way." Over the next few weeks, we carved out a fragile existence. Secret dates in out-of-the-way diners, late-night talks in his truck, stolen kisses when no one was looking. But the secrecy was a weight, and it was starting to crack us. Ethan grew quieter, his smiles less frequent. I threw myself into work, hoping to drown out the fear that we were on borrowed time. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Thursday, and I was sketching at my desk when my phone rang. Ethan's name flashed on the screen, but his voice was wrong, shaky, broken. "Caleb, it's my dad. He found out." My heart stopped. "Found out what?" "About us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He saw us at the diner last night. He followed me." The world tilted. I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to steady myself. "What did he say?" "He's furious. He wants me to meet him at the church tonight. Says we need to fix this." "Ethan, don't go," I said, panic rising. "Come to my place. We'll figure this out together." "I have to," he said. "He's my dad. I can't just run." I wanted to argue, to beg him to stay safe, but I heard the resolve in his voice. "Okay," I said, "but I'm coming with you." "No," he said quickly. "This is my fight." "It's ours," I countered. "I'm not letting you face this alone." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Okay. Meet me at the church at 7. As I hung up, fear and determination warred inside me. This was a moment we'd been dreading. But no matter what happened, I wasn't letting go of him. Not now. Not ever. The church loomed ahead, its steeple cutting into the twilight sky like a warning. Ethan's truck was already in the parking lot, and I pulled up beside it, my hands shaking on the wheel. This wasn't just a building, it was the heart of Ethan's world, where his dad's sermons had shaped his life and our secrets had no place. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood and old hymnals. Ethan stood near the altar, his shoulders hunched, his dad pacing in front of him. Pastor Michael was a tall man, his face carved with lines of conviction. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed. "Caleb," he said, his voice cold. "This doesn't concern you." "It does," I said, stepping closer to Ethan. "I'm here for him." Ethan's eyes met mine, a flicker of gratitude breaking through his fear. His dad's gaze darted between us, and I saw the moment he understood. "So it's true," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You've corrupted my son." "Dad, stop," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "This isn't about corruption. It's about who I am." Pastor Michael's face reddened. "Who you are? You're my son, raised to follow God's path. This," he gestured at us, "this is a sin." The word hit like a slap, but Ethan didn't flinch. "I love him," he said, his voice steady now. "And I'm done pretending I don't." I reached for his hand, and he laced his fingers with mine. A silent vow. Pastor Michael stared at us, his anger giving way to something worse, disappointment. "You're choosing this over your family?" he asked. "I'm not choosing anything over you," Ethan said. "I'm just trying to live honestly." The silence that followed was deafening. Pastor Michael turned away, his shoulders rigid. "Get out," he said. "Both of you." We left without another word, the door slamming shut behind us. In the parking lot, Ethan leaned against his truck, his breath ragged. "I didn't think it would hurt this much," he admitted. I pulled him into a hug, his warmth grounding me. "I'm here," I said, "no matter what." That night, Ethan stayed at my apartment. We didn't talk much, just held each other, letting the weight of the day settle. But the next morning, reality hit hard. Ethan's phone was flooded with texts from his family, some pleading, some angry. My parents called, their voices laced with suspicion after hearing rumors from the church grapevine. "We need to get out of here," Ethan said over coffee, his eyes tired but determined. "Just for a while. Clear our heads." I nodded. "Where to?" "Seattle," he said. "It's close enough, but far enough. We can start fresh, figure out what this means for us." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating. Leaving meant abandoning the life we'd known, but it also meant freedom. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." We spent the next few days planning. Ethan quit his job at the carpentry shop, and I wrapped up my freelance projects. We found a cheap apartment online, a one-bedroom in a quirky Seattle neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was ours. The drive to Seattle was quiet, the road stretching out like a promise. Ethan's hand rested on my knee, a small anchor in the uncertainty. "You think we're crazy?" he asked as we crossed the state line. "Probably," I said, grinning. "But I'd rather be crazy with you than sane without you." He laughed, and for the first time in days, it felt real. Seattle welcomed us with open arms, vibrant, diverse, a city where we could blend in. Our apartment was tiny, with creaky floors and a view of a brick wall, but it was a blank slate. We painted the walls a soft blue, hung string lights, and turned it into a home. But even in Seattle, the past followed us. Ethan's dad sent a letter, urging him to come back to God. My parents called weekly, their voices a mix of concern and judgment. We were building something new, but the ghosts of our old lives lingered. One night, as we lay in bed, Ethan turned to me, his eyes serious. "Do you ever think about going back?" he asked. I traced the line of his jaw, my heart steady. "Only if you're with me." He kissed me then, slow and deep, and for the first time, I felt like we might actually make it. But the world has a way of testing love, and ours was about to face its biggest challenge yet. Seattle was our refuge, but it wasn't a cure. The city buzzed with possibility, street markets, coffee shops, rainbow flags fluttering in the breeze, but the weight of our past clung to us. Ethan threw himself into a new carpentry job, building custom furniture for a local shop. I landed a gig designing posters for a small theater company, my sketches coming alive under stage lights. We were building a life, but it felt like we were always looking over our shoulders. One evening, as we walked through Pike Place Market, Ethan stopped at a stall selling handmade journals. He picked one up, running his fingers over the leather cover. "We should write our story," he said, half joking, "so we don't forget who we are." I smiled, but the idea stuck with me. That night, we started writing, scribbling memories, fears, and dreams in that journal. It became our ritual, a way to anchor ourselves amidst the chaos. But the chaos was never far away. A month into our new life, Ethan got a call from his sister, Lily. She was the only one in his family who hadn't cut him off, though their conversations were strained. "Dad's sick," she said, her voice tight. "He's asking for you." Ethan's face went pale. "What kind of sick?" "Heart trouble," she said. "He's in the hospital. He wants to see you." "Ethan, just you." I watched the conflict play out in his eyes, love for his father warring with the pain of rejection. "You don't have to go," I said, but I knew he would. "I need to," he said. "Not for him, for me." I drove him to the bus station the next morning, my heart heavy. "Call me," I said as he hugged me goodbye. "Every day?" "I will," he promised, his lips brushing my forehead. The next few days were torture. Ethan called as promised, but his voice was distant, weighed down by the hospital's sterile walls and his dad's silence. Pastor Michael hadn't mentioned us, hadn't apologized, but his illness had softened him enough to want Ethan there. I tried to focus on work, but my sketches were dark, jagged lines that mirrored my unease. On the fourth day, Ethan called with news. "He's stable," he said, "but he wants me to stay longer. Says there's things we need to talk about." "Like what?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I owe him this much." I wanted to argue, to beg him to come home, but I heard the resolve in his voice. "Okay," I said, "but don't forget who you are." He laughed softly. "I've got our journal." "I won't." But as the days turned into a week, then two, I felt him slipping away. His calls grew shorter, his voice more guarded. I threw myself into work, designing posters with a frenzy that scared me. The journal sat untouched on our bedside table, a reminder of the promises we'd made. Then, one night, he called, his voice raw. "Caleb, I'm coming home." "What happened?" I asked, my heart racing. "He told me he loves me," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "But he still thinks I'm wrong. That we're wrong. I can't stay here anymore." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I'll be waiting." When Ethan walked through our apartment door, he looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed with grief. I pulled him into my arms, and he clung to me like I was the only thing keeping him upright. "I tried," he whispered. I wanted him to understand. "I know," I said, my voice thick. "You did everything you could." We spent the night on the couch, the journal open between us. Ethan wrote about his dad's words, the pain of rejection, the flicker of hope in his sister's eyes. I wrote about my fear of losing him, my determination to hold on. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. The next morning, we made a decision. We couldn't keep running from our past, but we could face it on our terms. Ethan reached out to Lily, asking her to visit us in Seattle. I wrote a letter to my parents, not outing us, but opening the door to honesty. It was small, but it was progress. As spring bloomed in Seattle, so did we. We found a community friends who didn't bat an eye at our intertwined hands. A queer book club that welcomed us with open arms. But the real test was still coming, and it would push us to the edge of everything we'd built. Lily's visit was a turning point. She arrived on a rainy Saturday, her suitcase dripping as she stepped into our apartment. She was 22, with Ethan's blonde curls and a cautious smile that hit her nerves. "This place is cozy," she said, glancing at the string lights and the journal on the coffee table. We spent the day showing her Seattle coffee shops, bookstores, the waterfront. She asked questions about our life, careful not to pry too deep, but I saw the curiosity in her eyes. That night, over takeout, she finally asked, Are you happy? Really? Ethan looked at me, his hand finding mine under the table. Yeah, he said. Happier than I've ever been. Lily's smile was small but genuine. Good. You deserve that. Her acceptance felt like a lifeline, but it came with a warning. Dad's not going to change, she said. He's praying for you, Ethan, but it's not the kind of prayer you'd hope for. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. I know, but I'm done trying to fix him. After Lily left, we felt lighter, like we'd claimed a piece of our family back. But the world wasn't done testing us. A week later, my boss at the theater company called me into her office. Caleb, we got a complaint, she said, her face apologetic. Someone from your hometown. They saw your name on our website, and they're saying you're not suitable for our family-friendly productions. My blood ran cold. Who? She hesitated. They didn't give a name, but they mentioned your lifestyle. The word stung, but I forced myself to stay calm. Does this affect my job? No, she said firmly. We don't discriminate. But I thought you should know. I drove home in a daze, the word lifestyle echoing in my head. Ethan was waiting, his tools spread out as he worked on a new coffee table. One look at my face, and he dropped everything. What's wrong? I told him, the words spilling out like poison. He listened, his face darkening. This is my dad's doing, he said. Or someone from his church. They're trying to hurt us. We don't know that, I said, but the doubt was there. What do we do? We keep going, he said, his voice fierce. We don't let them win. But the pressure was mounting. My parents' calls grew more insistent, their questions sharper. Ethan's carpentry clients started canceling, citing vague reasons. It felt like our old lives were reaching out, trying to drag us back. One night, as we sat on our balcony, Ethan turned to me. What if we got married? He asked, his voice soft but serious. I stared at him, my heart racing. Married? Yeah, he said, a shy smile breaking through. Not now, not yet, but someday. A promise that we're in this for good. The idea was terrifying and beautiful. I imagined a life where we didn't have to hide, where we could build something permanent. I'd like that, I said, my voice thick. Someday. But someday felt far away when the next blow came. Ethan's dad showed up unannounced, standing in our doorway like a ghost from the past. We need to talk, he said, his eyes fixed on Ethan. I wanted to slam the door, to protect us from whatever he'd come to say. But Ethan nodded, his face unreadable. Okay, he said. Let's talk. Pastor Michael sat on our couch, his hands clasped tightly. I'm not here to fight, he said. I'm here because I'm losing my son. You're not losing me, Ethan said. You're pushing me away. His dad's eyes glistened, but his voice stayed firm. I can't accept this, Ethan, but I don't want to lose you. Can we find a middle ground? The question hung in the air, a fragile hope laced with impossibility. Ethan looked at me, his eyes asking for strength. There's no middle ground, he said. Not when it comes to who I love. Pastor Michael left without another word, his silence louder than any sermon. That night, Ethan cried in my arms, the weight of his father's rejection breaking him in ways I couldn't fix. But as I held him, I knew we were stronger than the world trying to tear us apart. The weeks after Pastor Michael's visit were a tightrope walk. Ethan threw himself into his work, crafting furniture with a focus that bordered on obsession. I buried myself in my designs, pouring my fears into every line. But we were healing, slowly, finding strength in the life we'd built. One evening, we attended a local pride event, our first as a couple. The streets were alive with color, music, and people who didn't care who we loved. Ethan held my hand, his grip tight, and I felt a freedom I'd never known. We danced under fairy lights, laughed with strangers, and for a few hours, the weight of the world lifted. But the past wasn't done with us. My parents called, asking me to come home for a family meeting. Their voices were calm, but I heard the undercurrent of expectation. "Bring Ethan," my mom said, and my heart sank. They knew. We drove back to Portland, the silence in the car heavy with dread. My parents' house was the same as always, crosses on the walls. The smell of lavender, but the air felt different, charged with unspoken truths. "Caleb," my dad said as we sat at the dining table, "we've heard things about you and Ethan." I glanced at Ethan, his face pale but resolute. "What things?" I asked, though I knew the answer. My mom's eyes were wet. "People are saying you're together in a way that's not right." "It's not wrong," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I love him." The words hung in the air, raw and unyielding. My dad's face hardened, but my mom reached for my hand. "We love you, Caleb," she said, "but this isn't what God wants." Ethan spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "With all due respect, I don't think God cares who we love, as long as we love well." The argument that followed was long and painful. My parents quoted scripture, their voices rising with conviction. Ethan and I held our ground, our hands clasped under the table. By the end, no one had won, but no one had backed down either. "We need time," my mom said finally, her voice breaking. "But you're still our son." It wasn't acceptance, but it was a crack in the wall. We left with a fragile hope, knowing we'd planted a seed, even if it would take years to grow. Back in Seattle, we leaned on our community. Friends rallied around us, offering support and stories of their own struggles. We kept writing in our journal, filling it with moments of joy and pain. It was our testament, proof that our love was worth fighting for. One night, as we lay in bed, Ethan turned to me. "I want to propose," he said, his voice soft but sure. "For real this time." My heart leapt. "When?" "Soon," he said, smiling. "I'm making something special for it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Ethan worked late in his shop, crafting a ring from walnut wood, polished to a warm glow. I planned a quiet dinner on our balcony, string lights twinkling above us. When the night came, he got down on one knee, the ring in his hand. "Caleb," he said, his voice trembling, "you're my home. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I nodded. "Yes," I whispered. "Always." We kissed under the stars, the world falling away. It wasn't a solution to our problems, but it was a promisea vow to face them together. But life doesn't pause for love. A week later, Ethan got a call from Lily. "Dad's worse," she said. "He's asking for you again." This time, Ethan didn't hesitate. "We're both going," he said, looking at me. "He needs to see us together." I nodded, my heart pounding. This was our final stand, the moment we'd either break or become unbreakable. The hospital in Portland smelled of antiseptic and fear. Pastor Michael lay in a bed, his face gaunt, an oxygen mask fogging with each breath. Ethan stood at his side, his hand gripping mine like a lifeline. Lily was there too, her eyes red but steady. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice soft but firm. I'm here. And so is Caleb. Pastor Michael's eyes flickered to me, then back to Ethan. For a moment, I thought he'd turn away, but he reached out a trembling hand. Ethan, he rasped, I've been wrong. The words hit like a wave. Ethan's grip tightened, and I felt my own breath catch. What do you mean? Ethan asked. I thought I was protecting you, his dad said, his voice weak. But I was pushing you away. I don't understand this. He gestured faintly at our joined hands. But I see how you look at each other. That's love. And I can't deny that. Tears streamed down Ethan's face, and I felt my own eyes burn. Thank you, Ethan whispered. That means everything. Pastor Michael didn't fully accept us yet, but his words were a bridge. Fragile but real. We spent the day at his bedside, talking about small things, memories of Ethan's childhood, the carpentry shop, the future. When we left, Ethan was lighter, like a weight had been lifted. My parents were next. We invited them to Seattle, and to my surprise, they came. Over coffee in our tiny apartment, we told them about the engagement. My mom cried, but not out of anger. I don't understand it, she said, but I want you to be happy. My dad was quieter, but he hugged me before they left. We'll get there, he said. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. We married 6 months later in a small ceremony at a Seattle park, surrounded by friends and Lily. Ethan's ring gleamed on my finger, a symbol of everything we'd fought for. Our vows were simple but fierce: to love, to fight, to never hide again. The journal became our legacy. We filled it with our story, every struggle, every triumph. One day, we hope to share it, to show others that love could survive even the darkest storms. Years later, we sat on our balcony, older but still us. Ethan's hair was streaked with gray, and my sketches had softened with time. The world hadn't fully changed. There were still battles, still judgments, but we'd built a life that was ours. Caleb, Ethan said, his hand sliding lower as he pulled me close. We did it. I smiled, my heart full. Yeah, I said. We did. And as the city sparkled below, I knew that no matter what came next, we'd face it together, two men who'd found love in a storm and refused to let it go.